welcome back to Ahead of the Curve. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Teed, and today is episode 62. I can't believe this has been going on for 62 episodes. Today, we are going to be talking about Pilates versus yoga for scoliosis. How do they differ? How are they similar? And which one I prefer. If you have followed this for any length of time, this podcast, me on Instagram, YouTube, any of the things, you should have a pretty good idea as to which one I prefer. If you don't, you'll have to just stay tuned for the rest of the episode. So it's kind of funny how over the years, the doctors who have encountered scoliosis patients, they tend to either fall into the two camps. They're either camp yoga or maybe two teams, team yoga or team Pilates. And it's not like a scoliosis specific Pilates or yoga. It's just kind of your traditional yoga and Pilates classes. And I think I understand why this happens. I think a lot of times this happens because, overall, these can be good recommendations for anybody that has a lower back issue or a back issue. These two movement practices can be really helpful. The problem lies in that scoliosis, while it is a back condition, it needs to be treated differently than other spines, symmetrical spines. You can't just treat scoliosis like any other spine. So the good thing is there are a lot more scoliosis specific Pilates and yoga options out there now. But that is not generally what's prescribed by the doctor. It's usually just kind of your traditional Pilates and yoga that you would imagine. So I want to talk a little bit about the background of the two practices, because that will also kind of lead you into a better understanding as to why I prefer one over the other for scoliosis. The history of yoga is very intense. It spans thousands of years, and it originated in ancient India. Kind of like a condensed overview. I'm not going to be able to pronounce these different periods very well. I'm going to try my best. But there was a pre-Vedic period, and that is before 1500 BC. And that's where the earliest traces of yoga can be found. These were like more ritualistic ceremonies. And then in the Vedic period, please give me some grace if I'm saying this wrong. That is 1500 BC to 500 BC. And this is where they don't like actually come out and detail yoga as a system, but it's more of like spiritual practices, rituals, and they're considered kind of like the precursors to yoga. And then there's the Upanishadic period, and that is 800 BC to 200 BC. These are some texts that delve into the nature of, what is reality, what is self, what is truth. And then there's the pre-classical period, and that's from 200 BC to 500. And this is where they get into more of like the different like fluctuations of the mind that occur in someone's lifespan. Then there's the classical period, 500 AD to 1600 AD. And during this time, that's when the different schools of yoga kind of came to be. And there's all sorts of different schools. So there's like a hatha yoga, there's karma yoga, bhakti, bhakti yoga. And then there is the post-classical period, which is 1600 AD till now. And that's where there's the evolution of yoga that now you have Tantra yoga and modern adaptations like vinyasa and things like that. So they still hold on to some of the spiritual practices, breath work, and the mind body connection, but it's more focused on the physical aspects of the different positions, the pranayama, which is the breath control, and the meditation. So that is kind of the history of yoga, and I did a very brief overview. I mean, there's a lot of history there. Pilates does not have quite the extensive history that yoga does. Pilates wasn't developed until the early 20th century, and that was by Joseph Pilates. He was born in 1883 in Germany, and he had a lot of health issues. So one of his ways of trying to overcome some of his physical limitations was that he really got into studying exercise. So that included yoga, also included some martial arts and gymnastics. So his early interest in all of this movement and physical fitness kind of laid the foundation for the development of his method. And then in the early 20th century, Joseph Pilates moved to England from Germany. He worked as a circus performer, and I kind of forgot that was part of his history. I remembered that he was a boxer, so he worked as a circus performer and a boxer when he was in England. So it kind of makes some sense with when you see the apparatus, especially the Cadillac, the Pilates Cadillac, and some of the movements that are done on it. It kind of reminds you of Cirque du Soleil, those amazing, upside down positions of people kind of dangling from the ceiling. So then during World War I, he interned at a camp with other German nationals. And this is where he began developing his exercise system, which he called contrology. And it's spelled like controlology, pretty much. And he created it, contrology, for people who were bedridden or had limited mobility. So it was established as a rehab type of program. So he incorporated resistance training, stretching, breath control, and he used hospital beds as that form of resistance. So like if you can picture, I think it is called the trapeze on a hospital bed, but the little triangle that people use to pull up on to adjust themselves in bed, he used all of the equipment that surrounded the hospital bed as their form of rehab. So then after the war, Joseph Pilates moved to New York City, and he opened a studio in the same building as several dance studios. So this is where you see like kind of a little bit of a big transition in the people who showed up and who were interested in the Pilates method. So a lot of dancers, a lot of performers found it really beneficial to kind of cross-train for the activity that they were involved in, because it helped to improve their strength, their flexibility, and their overall performance. So that is the background on Pilates. Now I'm going to just talk about a couple of the similarities and differences between the two methods. One of the greatest methods of doing yoga for scoliosis is the focus on breath work. And just like the extensive history of yoga, there's also an extensive amount of different types of breath work that are involved in yoga. And I'm not going to go into like really detailed accounts of the different types of breath work, but I'm just going to explain a few things that I really like that can be beneficial for scoliosis. So the one type of breath work is called, oh boy. Okay. Here we go with my pronunciation. Nadi Shodhana. And this is where you do alternating like nostril breaths. So you're plugging one side of the nose and you're breathing through the other side. It is super amazing to apply this to a body that has scoliosis, because our goal is to use our breath to help inflate the lungs, which helps to expand the hollow spaces of the rib cage. So it's nearly impossible to direct your breath here but not there when you're doing your breath work. So when you are plugging one nostril, let's take for instance my curve. My primary curve is in my left rib cage, or my left thoracic if we're getting medically. If I plug my right nostril and I inhale just through my left nostril, it directs my breath more towards that left lung. So I'm able to expand and inflate into that side of the rib cage a little bit better than if I just inhale through both nostrils. So I really, really like that technique. It is not, the way that I described it is not the way that it's executed with yoga. I mean, it's literally, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe you're literally alternating each breath with a change of which nostril you're inhaling through. Look it up to get more of the accurate description of what is actually happening with that. But that is a big takeaway that I've taken from that type of breathing practice, is how beneficial it can be when you're applying it in a little bit of a different manner. And then there's another type, it's called skull shining breath. And then it has a name that I cannot pronounce very well either. Kapalabhati, and that's a rapid, forceful exhalation followed by a passive inhalation. And this is used to clear the lungs and energize the body. And if we're able to really clear the lungs, that ends up working the diaphragm. Like if we're doing a very, very forceful exhalation, you're getting a lot of good work through the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is often stuck on people who have scoliosis. So that is why I like some of these breathing practices. There's some other really great ones where they're focusing on breathing deeply into the different levels of the lungs, so the lower, middle, and upper. There's pursed lip breathing as well, and that helps to cool the system, cool the body down. In contrast, with Pilates, breathing it's okay. It's similar in that breathing is considered a fundamental component of the exercises, but the difference is the intention behind the breath work. So the intention behind the breath work with Pilates is more to engage the core, improve the focus of the exercise, and to help facilitate more smooth, controlled movements. So, some of the ways that Pilates does breath work in a way that's beneficial for scoliosis is the lateral thoracic breathing, especially if you're someone who has kyphosis. So lateral means side to side breathing. So you're breathing into the right and the left side of the rib cage. If you have a kyphosis, when you are working specifically on that kyphosis, the intention is breathing into the sides of the rib cage, and that helps to draw the spine forward because the spine is drawn back. So that can be really beneficial when you're applying that to a movement practice as well. They also in Pilates focus on diaphragmatic breathing, and this is where you use the diaphragm to draw air like deeper into your lungs, and it allows for more of like a full and controlled breath. Another form of breathing in Pilates is elongation breathing. So that is where you're extending the inhalation. So if you take an inhale, kind of notice what happens to your body. So just taking an inhale, you naturally grow a little bit taller on that inhale. And then when you exhale, you kind of naturally, if you're just succumbing to that breath, you end up sinking into the exhale. So part of that is really beneficial. So focusing on that inhale and creating the elongation. The difference between just Pilates and scoliosis specific Pilates, you want to maintain the growth that you achieved on the inhale on your exhale. So it's all about maintaining the length that you create. It's all about maintaining the expansion. And then finally, breathing in Pilates helps to coordinate the movement. So the breath is coordinated with, let's see, so inhale is usually like a preparatory part of a movement, and then the exhale is the execution. That's kind of a nice way to remember what happens when. I always tell people if you're getting really confused on the way that I'm cueing you with your inhales and exhales, just make sure you're breathing. I just don't want you to pass out. So, yeah. And then another difference between yoga and Pilates. Yoga as a practice tends to focus more on flexibility and holding your body in certain shapes. And this can be really great for building strength and improving overall posture. But for somebody with scoliosis, it doesn't always take into consideration the complexity of your curve. So while you may be improving flexibility in one area of your curve, another area of your curve might be getting compromised. So it can be hard to determine that if you don't know much about what your curve is doing. Then in contrast, Pilates focuses more on core strength, alignment, and body awareness. So Pilates, while it works on mobility, its goal isn't to achieve like a massive range of motion. So when you are mobilizing in a Pilates class, you're also paying attention to what's happening to the rest of the body. So for instance, like bridging, bridging is helping to improve. This is very elementary, basic explanation of bridging. But bridging, it helps to improve the mobility of the front of the hips, so your hip flexors. It helps to strengthen the glutes and the hamstrings. In Pilates bridging, instead of trying to achieve a massive amount of range of motion where your hips are super duper extended and you're compressing your lower back, it focuses and also takes into consideration what is happening in your lower back, what is happening in through your neck. We don't want to be lifting the hips super high and then compressing the neck because all the weight is being put into the neck. With Pilates, you want to make sure that you're only lifting to the point where you're able to maintain like a nice lengthened lower back. Finally, this is my last point of the differences. So most of yoga is done in a standing position, and it moves through all the different poses in that standing position. While moving in this manner is really functional, it is very hard for someone who has scoliosis to maintain their corrections against gravity and in all those different postures and positions. In Pilates, you always have, not always, most of the time you have a point to organize your spine from. So when you're laying on your back, when you're doing Pilates, you're usually either on your back, on your side, or on your front. And in all those different positions, you have a nice wide base of support, making contact with your support surface. So it's easier for you to use props, and it's easier for you to organize your spine away from. It's hard to know where you're at in space when you're standing because you only have your feet as your reference point. So when you're having, your entire back of the body in contact with the floor, it makes it a lot easier for you to organize your spine and make adjustments for your scoliosis. So I think if you haven't picked up on it by now, I recommend doing Pilates over yoga for scoliosis. And overall, it's mostly a matter of the practice being created for rehabilitation to begin with. So it's easy to modify. It's easy to make adjustments for your condition, for your scoliosis. And I really like the breath practices that are involved with Pilates classes. I think it has a lot of good crossover between scoliosis specific work and the Pilates work. And then finally, it helps you to have a continuous awareness of where you are in space. So it's more focused on control, positioning, and posture and strength, core strength. And you usually have something to help organize your spine from. So I am really grateful that you tuned in today. If you love yoga and you are really mad at me from this episode. I'm sorry, but it is my personal opinion, and it's also my personal experience with my body going and taking these two different types of classes. So um, that is it for today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Until next time, stay well and stay ahead of the curve.